In the summer of 1934, 5 children smiled for a photograph in the woods near Whispering Pines, but only 4 of them were alive when the shutter clicked. What happened next would haunt a town for generations and leave behind a photograph that defies every explanation. The photograph rests in my hand, its edges brittle with time, the image faintly sepia-toned. It captures 5 children smiling innocently at the camera, bathed in the golden light of an August afternoon in 1934. There's a serenity to the scene, tall grass swaying behind them, a thick forest beyond, and the kind of carefree joy only childhood can offer. I found it last month while cleaning out my grandfather's attic in the small town of Whispering Pines. It was tucked inside an old leather photo album, the kind with crumbling black pages and delicate photo corners. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, was a note. 5 smiled. 4 were there. August 14th, 1934. My name is Gabriel Mercer. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural, but that discovery has taken me down a path that's forced me to question everything I thought I knew about reality, memory, and what a photograph can truly capture. This is the story I've pieced together, of 5 children, a summer of secrets, and a moment frozen in time that refuses to fade. Whispering Pines isn't a town that makes headlines. Nestled between the ridges of southern Appalachia, it's the kind of place that seems unchanged by time. When I drove back to visit after nearly a decade, it felt like stepping into a memory. The same white church steeple, the diner with homemade pies, and the forest trails that feel endless. But beneath that timeless surface lies a story largely forgotten, buried in whispers and old newsprint. That photograph and the mystery around it has become my obsession. I've spoken to historians, reviewed old records, and tracked down the last living witnesses. What I found was more than a tale of childhood gone awry. It's a reflection of grief, guilt, and perhaps something beyond understanding. Before we go further, I ask you to suspend disbelief and simply listen. Because sometimes truth doesn't fit neatly into logic. In the summer of 1934, 5 children were known throughout Whispering Pines as a tight-knit group. They called themselves the Lantern Five, a name inspired by their nightly adventures, catching fireflies and telling ghost stories under the stars. Their names were Theo Burns, Clara Holloway, Simon Cy Dalton, Evelyn Brooks, and Jonah Reed. Theo was considered the ringleader. Tall, confident, and endlessly curious, he had an infectious enthusiasm that drew others in. His father ran the local paper, the Pines Gazette, and Theo often accompanied him, sneaking glances at crime reports and town rumors. Clara, with her ever-present notebooks, was the sharpest of the group. She wore oversized glasses and spoke in rapid, enthusiastic bursts, her head always half in a book. Her mother was the town's only nurse, and Clara often spouted medical facts with unnerving accuracy. C. Dalton was the athlete. Lean and fast, he could outrun anyone in town, and was always covered in scabs and bruises from his daring feats. His father had once played semi-pro baseball before the crash of '29, and now worked as a coal loader. Evelyn, with her bright red braids and boundless imagination, was the storyteller. She could spin entire worlds from thin air, and had a way of making even the adults pause and listen. Her father operated the telegraph lines, so she was often the first to know of news coming into town. Then there was Jonah. Quiet, artistic, and introspective. Jonah was the son of Elijah Reed, the town's only photographer. He spent most of his time learning how to develop film in the darkroom or experimenting with old lenses. While the other children built forts and played games, Jonah was the observer, the one who noticed the flicker of a shadow or the way light filtered through trees. They spent nearly every day of that summer together. From building elaborate hideouts near Pine Hollow Sea, to daring each other to climb the old water tower, they were inseparable. To the rest of the town, they were a symbol of youthful innocence during a time when the world was still reeling from economic collapse. But behind that innocence, something darker lingered. I found references to the group in archived editions of the Pines Gazette. Birthdays celebrated, contests won, even a prize for best decorated float during the 4th of July parade. They were real, tangible. But when I asked around during my recent visit, few people remembered them. One name, however, triggered a reaction nearly every time. Jonah Reed. An elderly man at the general store, when I asked about Jonah, simply muttered, "That boy, he was never meant to stay." I didn't understand it then, but I would. It was August 9th, 1934, a Thursday, when Jonah Reed disappeared. The town had been enjoying a streak of unseasonably warm weather. The creek was higher than usual, the forest trails lush and overgrown. According to reports in the Pines Gazette, Jonah was last seen heading into the woods near Pine Hollow Creek with the rest of the Lantern Five. They had told their parents they were going to reinforce their hideout by the water. A fallen tree made a natural bridge to the small island where they built forts and told stories. As the sun dipped low that evening, 4 children returned home. Jonah did not. Elijah Reed was the first to notice. His son had promised to help develop photographs that evening, a routine they'd kept all summer. When Jonah hadn't returned by sundown, Elijah grew concerned. By 8 p.m., he was walking the forest trails calling Jonah's name. By midnight, the sheriff had been alerted, and a search was underway. The town mobilized quickly. Whispering Pines might have been small, but it was tightly knit. Men with lanterns combed the woods. Women gathered at the church to organize food and rest stations for the searchers. S.I.'s father led a group that walked the length of Pine Hollow Creek by moonlight. The search continued into the next morning and the next. Dogs were brought in from neighboring towns. The creek was dragged, and every outbuilding and barn within a 5-mile radius was checked. The 4 other children, Theo, Clara, Cy, and Evelyn, were interviewed by Sheriff Monroe. All of them told the same story. They had played by the creek most of the afternoon. Around 5 o'clock, Jonah said he was tired and wanted to go home. He left alone, walking the path back toward town. That was the last they saw of him. The sheriff found no inconsistencies in their stories. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no clue as to where Jonah might have gone. But Elijah's. Reed refused to believe his son had simply wandered off. "Jonah knew those woods better than most grown men," he was quoted saying. "He wouldn't get lost. Not like that." For 3 long days the town searched. Rumors began to spread. Some said Jonah had run away. Others whispered that he had fallen down an old well or been taken by something in the woods. But no one had proof. The woods around Whispering Pines grew thick with dread, and then on the 5th day, the photograph was taken. The date was August the 14th, 1934, 5 days after Jonah Reed had vanished. That morning, Elijah Reed received an anonymous note tucked under the front door of his photography studio. It was scrawled on old ledger paper, the ink uneven and hurried. "Bring your camera to the hollow tree at noon. Jonah will be there." Elijah, grief-stricken and desperate for any lead, rushed to the sheriff's office with the note. Sheriff Monroe, skeptical but sympathetic, agreed to accompany him to Pine Hollow Creek. The hollow tree, referred to in the note, was a towering, ancient oak that had stood for generations near the children's fort. It was known to be a gathering place, a landmark of their summer adventures. When Elijah and Sheriff Monroe arrived, they weren't alone. Theo, Clara, Cy, and Evelyn were already waiting, standing solemnly in a semicircle near the tree. They were unusually quiet, their faces pale and drawn. Elijah's voice trembled when he spoke. "Where is he?" "He's here," Theo answered, pointing to the space between Clara and Evelyn. "He wants you to take our picture." Sheriff Monroe furrowed his brow. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" But the children stood firm. "Please," Clara said. "Just take it. Jonah wants it." Elijah hesitated, looking through the viewfinder of his camera. All he saw were 4 children and an empty gap between them. But something in their eyes, perhaps desperation, perhaps conviction, moved him. He lifted the camera. "Smile," he said softly. The shutter clicked. Later that evening, Elijah returned to his darkroom. He moved like a man in a dream, his hands trembling as he processed the film. The photograph emerged slowly in the tray of chemicals. And when the image fully revealed itself, Elijah staggered backward. There in the center stood Jonah, not faded, not ghostly, but clear, smiling. The next morning, the photograph was the talk of the town, and Sheriff Munro, after inspecting it himself, took it into evidence. He ruled that Elijah had created it using a trick of double exposure, spirit photography he called it. But others weren't so sure. The children, when questioned again, didn't budge from their story. Jonah had been there. He had asked for one final photograph. The photograph became a relic, an artifact wrapped in mystery, stored eventually in the county's historical archive, and to this day no expert has found any evidence of tampering. What was captured on that film? A trick of light? A father's desperate illusion? Or something far stranger? The story was far from over. The photograph should have offered closure. Instead, it raised more questions and slowly unraveled the fragile truth the children had been holding together. Sheriff Munro continued his investigation with renewed intensity. The official explanation was laid out in a town council meeting. Elijah Reed, in a fit of grief or as a deliberate fabrication, had used double exposure to create an image of his missing son. It was presented as rational, a tidy explanation meant to soothe public fears. But those closest to the children knew something didn't add up. 3 days after the photograph was taken, Simon Cy Dalton broke. It was a warm evening when he confessed. Sheriff Munro had invited each child for a second round of questioning, this time individually, and away from the comforting presence of their friends. Cy arrived alone, eyes red from lack of sleep, fingers twitching. He lasted only 10 minutes in the sheriff's office before the dam burst. "It was a game," he said. "A stupid game. We dared Jonah to cross the log." According to Cy's confession, the 5 children had been playing near the creek that afternoon, daring one another to increasingly risky feats. It was Theo's idea to dare Jonah to cross the creek on a large, slippery log that spanned the water. The recent rains had made the current stronger, the banks muddier, the log slick. Jonah had hesitated. He didn't want to do it, but they teased him, called him scared, said he always got out of things. "He just wanted us to think he was brave," Cy muttered. "He made it halfway, and then he slipped." The creek had swallowed him in seconds. Theo and Cy had run downstream, screaming his name. Clara and Evelyn bolted toward town for help, but by the time anyone returned, Jonah was gone. Panic set in. They knew what would happen if they told the truth. The guilt, the blame. So they made up a story. Jonah had decided to head home. He'd left on his own. No one could prove otherwise. Sheriff Munro took detailed notes, then summoned the other children. Under the weight of Cy's confession and their own silent shame, their story fractured. Clara sobbed. Evelyn couldn't speak. Theo tried to hold the line, but eventually nodded in agreement. They hadn't meant for it to happen. They were scared. Children. The sheriff organized a final search of the creek, this time focused downstream, 2 miles beyond where they had previously looked. A group of volunteers found Jonah's body wedged beneath a fallen tree limb, tangled in debris. The cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning. There were no charges. Sheriff Munro, under the guidance of the town council and Elijah Reed's wishes, declared the case closed. The children had suffered enough. Still, the community changed. A quiet tension settled over Whispering Pines. The children became withdrawn. Their parents carried unspoken burdens. The Reed family moved away within a year, unable to endure the echoes of grief that haunted their home and Elijah's now shuttered studio. But the story didn't end there. Despite the logical resolution, the photograph continued to puzzle those who saw it. Experts were brought in. None could detect any signs of manipulation, no double exposure, no composite techniques. The lighting on Jonah matched perfectly with the others. His shadow fell the same way. His expression, a half-smile so unmistakably Jonah, haunted anyone who looked long enough. And then there was the sixth figure. It wasn't visible at first, not in the copies, not even in the initial development, but under magnification, peering through the blurred branches behind the children, one could just make out a shape. Tall, faint, human-like. A presence, standing still in the shade, as though watching. At first, Elijah dismissed it as damage on the film, but as others inspected it, photographers, curators, skeptics, they began to wonder. No other images from the same roll showed such a distortion. It was unique to that one frame, that one moment. I later discovered, through records kept at the county archive, that Elijah Reed had a brother, Nathaniel, who died in World War I. The resemblance between Nathaniel's surviving photographs and the blurry figure in the background was unsettling. When I asked the archive curator if Elijah ever mentioned seeing the figure, she shook her head. But she did recall one odd event. In the late 1970s, during a local exhibit on historical photography, the original print had been laced on display. Afterward, when returned to its storage case, staff noticed new handwriting on the back. Just a single line scribbled in pencil, in a child's unmistakable scrawl. "I forgive you. J.R." There were no signs of a break-in, no explanation for how the writing appeared. I'd like to believe it was a prank, some morbid joke played by a bored volunteer. But part of me, an ever-growing part, can't shake the feeling that Jonah really did come back. If only for a moment. Not for revenge, but for peace. For one last goodbye. And yet the story was still not over. The original photograph, now stored in a temperature-controlled case at the Whispering Pines Historical Society, has been studied by everyone from local historians to photographic archivists from major institutions. No one can explain it. I've examined the high-resolution scans myself under professional-grade magnification, and the more I looked, the more unsettled I became. There are 5 children in that photograph. Not 4. 5. Jonah Reed stands in the center of the group, smiling just slightly, his hands behind his back, head tilted in the way his father once described as his curious thinking pose. There is no translucency, no blur, no faded edges or inconsistencies in lighting. Jonah appears as physically present as Theo, Clara, Cy, and Evelyn. Each child's shadow stretches in the same direction. Their outlines are crisp, their clothes rumpled from a day of play. And then there's the gap. There should be a space between Clara and Evelyn. But there isn't. Jonah fills it perfectly. Photographic analysts have put forward theories. Some suggest that Elijah Reed must have used an advanced form of double exposure, combining a previous photo of Jonah into this new image. But this would have required photographic precision far beyond the means of a small-town studio in 1934, and there are no earlier images matching Jonah's pose, angle, or clothing. One particularly compelling analysis came from Dr. Amelia Cross, a photographic historian I interviewed at length. She had traveled from Chicago to examine the print in person. "If this is a fake," she told me, "then it is the most sophisticated and seamless manipulation I've ever seen from that era. But I don't believe it's fake. I think the camera captured what the eye could not." That statement stuck with me. It suggested something profound. What if our eyes, our perceptions, are limited not by reality, but by belief? What if cameras, those tools designed to capture reflected light, sometimes reveal what we're not ready to see? The sixth figure only deepens the mystery. Standing among the shadows of the old oak, he is partially concealed, but undeniably there. Many viewers miss it at first glance, but once it's seen, it cannot be unseen. The curve of a shoulder, the silhouette of a jawline. There is presence in that figure. Intent. Stillness. Some locals believe it was Elijah's brother, Nathaniel, watching over the children. Others say it was something far older, an ancient guardian of the forest perhaps, disturbed by the tragedy of a child lost too soon. Folklore in the region speaks of the Watcher in the Pines, a spirit that guards over the innocent, appearing only in moments of profound grief. And yet, there's another theory. While researching the children's later lives, I came across an interview given by Theo Burns in 1985, a year before his death. By then, he had become a professor of quantum physics at a university in North Carolina. He rarely spoke of the events of 1934, but in that interview, published in an obscure academic journal, he referenced the photograph. "Science explains a lot," he wrote, "but it doesn't account for consciousness, or grief, or memory. I've come to believe that strong emotion, especially collective emotion, can leave an imprint, a real physical one. What that camera captured that day might not have been a ghost in the traditional sense. It may have been a moment of convergence, a tear in the fabric, a memory so powerful it imprinted itself onto light. A memory made real, a presence caught in amber. Jonah's friends would gather at the oak tree every August 14th for years. They never missed it, not once. Clara died. Young in 1945, Evelyn passed away in 1976. Cy disappeared from the public eye, moving west and changing his name. But each August, somehow, he made it back. Locals recall seeing them, standing in a quiet circle facing the tree, sometimes placing a hand on its bark, other times sitting in silence. They weren't just remembering Jonah. They were returning to a moment that defined and haunted their lives. That photograph didn't just capture Jonah. It captured them, as they were, as they never could be again. A moment frozen in contradiction, joy and guilt, laughter and loss. Perhaps that's what makes it so haunting. There is one final detail I must share, something I noticed during a recent visit to the Historical Society. As I sat studying the photograph again, this time under natural light, I spotted a faint smudge near the base of the oak tree in the background. At first I thought it was a flaw in the paper, but under magnification it appeared to be another hand. Not one of the children, larger, positioned as if resting on the tree trunk from behind. A gesture of support, a farewell. It chilled me. Whatever the truth is, I believe that photograph is more than an image. It's a relic, a monument, a testament to the strangeness of memory and the mysteries we dare not name. And the story still isn't done. Time passed, as it always does, eroding the sharp edges of memory but never quite wiping them clean. The tragedy at Whispering Pines faded from public consciousness, buried under newer headlines and more immediate concerns. But for those who had been part of that summer, the ones who lived it, who carried it, the echoes remained. Clara Holloway became a nurse during World War II. She served in Europe, tending to wounded soldiers with the same quiet diligence she once applied to organizing games and stories in the woods. She died in 1945 from complications due to tuberculosis, a shadow that had loomed in her family for years. In her final diary entry, found tucked into the pages of a medical anatomy book, she wrote, "Sometimes I still see him by the creek. I don't run, I just watch. He doesn't speak, but he's never angry. Just there." Evelyn Brooks, the storyteller of the group, returned to Whispering Pines after marrying a railway inspector. She taught second grade at the local school, known for her imaginative teaching methods and a peculiar habit of turning classroom walls into timelines of remembered summers. She passed away in 1976. At her funeral, a neighbor mentioned that Evelyn always left a lantern lit in her classroom window on August the 14th, saying it was for a visitor who might come calling. Simon Cy Dalton moved west in the 1950s, eventually settling under a new name in Oregon. He lived a quiet life, never marrying, working as a night janitor at a university. A librarian there recalled that Cy would often stare for long stretches at old black-and-white photographs without explanation. He died in 1991. Among his sparse possessions was a single photo, creased and yellowed, of 5 children by a tree. And then there was Theo Burns. Theo became a physicist, his brilliance recognized early. He lectured at universities across the East Coast and contributed to St. Shade, several early studies on the dual nature of light. But those who knew him say he always seemed distracted, as if carrying a heavy memory that pulled at his focus. In a rare interview just before his death in 1986, he spoke about Jonah for the first time in over 50 years. "We never expected forgiveness. We didn't even know what we were asking for. But I know, he gave it to us. The moment the shutter clicked, we felt something. A stillness, a warmth, like we'd been seen, not judged, just witnessed. And that was enough." Elijah Reed never reopened his studio. After the loss of his son and the national attention the photograph briefly drew, he and his wife moved north, never to return. Records show he died in 1958. His last will requested that the photograph remain in Whispering Pines, with one condition. It was never to be removed, sold, or altered. It was to be preserved as it was, untouched. Witness to something beyond explanation. To this day, the photograph is kept in a small glass case in the back room of the Whispering Pines Historical Society. A discreet sign reads, "The Lantern 5, August 14th, 1934. Beneath it sits a guest book, and every year on that date, visitors leave messages. Some express awe, others confusion. A few claim to have seen the 6th figure. But one entry, dated August 14th, 2001, reads simply, "You were never forgotten, Jonah. We came back, just like we promised. TB." Even now, there are whispers. Children who play near Pine Hollow Creek sometimes speak of a quiet boy who watches from the woods, smiling. Some say he waves. Some say he points to the tree. A few return claiming they saw 5 kids standing there, all smiling, though no one else was around. Skeptics laugh. Parents blame active imaginations. But every year the story resurfaces. And perhaps that's the truth behind it all, not the ghost, not the science, but the persistence of memory. A moment so powerful, so emotionally dense, that it refuses to fade. It echoes. It lingers. And sometimes it reappears. Not to scare, but to be seen. It's a quiet morning as I sit by the old oak at Pine Hollow Creek, the very place where 5 children stood nearly a century ago, and smiled for a photograph that should never have been. The tree still towers above the forest floor, its bark split and weathered, its limbs stretched wide as if to cradle the memories whispered through its leaves. There's a strange stillness here, one that feels sacred. The creek murmurs just beyond the bend, the birds flit in the canopy above, and sunlight filters through the branches in narrow beams like spotlights illuminating unseen moments. I can almost hear them, footsteps, laughter, the rustle of summer clothes against grass, and the distant familiar call of someone's name. The photo, the story, the tragedy. They've all shaped this town in ways most have forgotten. But the earth doesn't forget. The trees don't forget. And maybe, just maybe, neither do we. I returned to Whispering Pines not just to chase a mystery, but to understand it. What I found was more than a case of lost innocence. It was a meditation on grief, on memory, on the desperate ways we try to make sense of loss. Whether Jonah Reed appeared in that photograph as a supernatural entity, a residue of guilt, or a moment of emotional convergence, his presence was real to those who loved him. And perhaps that's all that matters. The question I've asked myself most is, why did Jonah come back? Not in body, clearly, but in some form, some glimpse. Was it to be remembered? To offer forgiveness? Or was it the camera, the witness, capturing not just light, but emotion? Echoes of presence? It's hard to say, but I keep coming back to the note found scribbled on the back of that photograph in the unmistakable handwriting of a child. I forgive you. J.R. Maybe forgiveness is the clearest proof of presence, not in the spectral, eerie sense, but in the enduring imprint we leave on one another. Jonah forgave them, and somehow, through a photograph, through time, he let them know. I stand and walk the edge of the creek, pausing at the spot where Jonah was last seen. The water looks calm now, but underneath, the current still flows strong, invisible to the casual observer, just like the story itself, tranquil at the surface, but deep beneath. The town of Whispering Pines continues. Children play. People move in and out. Most don't know the story. Most will never see the photograph. But those who do, those who feel that inexplicable chill down their spine when they look too long into Jonah's eyes, they understand. This wasn't just a ghost story. It was a moment when the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary grew thin. And that's what I try to uncover. Because there are other photographs, other notes, other stories hidden in attics, basements, and sealed boxes tucked behind false panels. This wasn't the only one, not even close. You see, the shadows of history are full of witnesses, quiet, forgotten, waiting to be seen. So if this story moved you, unsettled you, or stirred something you can't quite name, keep watching the Witness Archives. Because some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They're meant to be remembered.